news tonight, His Majesty the King holds a series of meetings on Syria and other Middle East conflicts during a trip to Russia. Jordan condemns the closure of entrances to occupied Jerusalem's holy sites to Muslim worshippers and warns Israel against attempts to change the status quo in the holy city. And the Saudi military says it intercepts a ballistic missile fired by Yemen's Houthi militia and retaliates with airstrikes against the rebel group. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. His Majesty the King is back home, wrapping up a working trip to Russia. King Abdullah held talks with President Vladimir Putin on Jordanian-Russian ties and political and international developments. His Majesty also met with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Here's more.
The situation in Syria and other Middle Eastern conflicts topped the agenda of the Kremlin talks between His Majesty King Abdullah and Russian President Vladimir Putin. The fight against terrorism was also a key issue up for discussion. The two leaders expressed their joint interest to further cooperation and partnership between the two countries in various fields. At the level of bilateral relations, the King and Putin reviewed a number of joint economic projects, mainly in the energy sector, and ways to enable Jordan to benefit from the Russian expertise in this field. Speaking to reporters before the talks, the leaders voiced satisfaction with the level of relations between Moscow and Amman.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Again, very impressed today with the air show. It was truly a very memorable occasion to be with you this afternoon. I was especially touched with the program you have for the youth, especially with technology and science. That was very impressive. I'm delighted to be back here in Moscow, and as you well know, we have a very strong and important relationship between our two countries that you have continued to build between our two nations. And I'm looking forward to being able to discuss many of the major challenges in our region that have been plaguing us for several years, and the vital role that you and Russia have been playing for such a long time and continue to play to bring stability to our region. Not only trying to bring Israelis and Palestinians closer together to find a peaceful solution to that long and difficult conflict, but also, as you know, I have said for many years, as we try to find a solution for Syria, I have believed that the only way we can find a solution for Syria is the vital role that you and your country play to find a political solution for all parties to bring stability to that country that has endured so much. So your role and the role of your nation is vital for our area, and I'm delighted to be back here in Moscow to be able to listen to you and to be able to exchange with you and my colleagues here in Moscow today. So thank you for having us back.
Another highlight of King Abdullah's trip was joining Arab and other leaders at the opening ceremony of the International Aviation and Space Salon, which runs between 25th to the 30th of this month in the city of Zhukovsky, southeast of Moscow. His Majesty the Russian leader and heads of delegation attending the show watched air performances by the Russian Air Force. The leaders toured the exhibition, one of the world's largest and most important international aviation and air defense industries exhibitions. On the sidelines of the International Aviation and Space Salon, King Abdullah met Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Deputy Supreme Commander of the UAE Armed Forces, General Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, for a discussion on cooperation between Jordan and the UAE, as well as regional developments. Also during the Russian visit, King Abdullah and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi discussed regional issues and agreed to continue coordination to serve the interests of the two countries. The two leaders called for a comprehensive political solution in Syria to end the suffering of its people and preserve the country's unity and territorial integrity. They also said efforts should be stepped up to end the current impasse in the peace process and kick-start negotiations between the Palestinians and Israel. The King and Sisi also discussed Iraq and expressed their support of Libya's states, agencies and efforts to bring about peace, security and stability in the North African country. Hiba Al-Atoum for the news at 10.
Also during talks in Moscow, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Russian President Vladimir Putin pledged to further boost cooperation between the two countries. It was Sisi's third visit to Moscow. The agenda included economic cooperation, the fight against extremism, and the political situation in the Middle East. At a joint news conference following the talks, the Russian president spoke of a possible cooperation between Egypt and the Eurasian Economic Union. The Eurasian Union, which includes Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan, was created to guarantee free transit of goods, services, capital, and workforce, and coordinate policy for major economic sectors. Putin also announced Russia's participation in the construction of a nuclear power plant in Egypt. Jordan condemned Israel's closure of Al-Aqsa Mosque gates that kept the holy compound off limits to Muslim worshippers. Meantime, Israel's military forces had given free access and escorts to extremist settlers and ultra-Orthodox Jews into Al-Haram al-Sharif compound, Islam's third holiest shrine. Minister of State for Media Affairs Mohammed al-Momeni repeated that Jordan rejects such restrictions imposed by the Israeli occupation authorities and warned of attempts to change the status quo in the holy city. He reminded the Israelis of understandings reached at a 2014 meeting between His Majesty the King, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to keep the status quo in Jerusalem and respect the Hashemite custodianship over holy sites in occupied East Jerusalem. Momeni also said Jordan's Ministry of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs has appointed 52 new employees and guards to Jerusalem Awqaf Department. On a visit to Sweden, Prime Minister Abdullah Nsur discussed with top officials ways and means to forge closer ties between Jordan and Sweden. Nsur briefed Swedish Parliament Speaker Urban Ahlin about Jordan's political, economic and social reform drive to enhance democracy and freedoms. He also talked about the turmoil in the region, namely the conflict in Syria and its impact on Jordan, stressing that a political solution would end the bloodshed in the country. The Prime Minister said Middle East security and stability hinged on finding a just and lasting solution to the Palestinian issue, the core problem in the region. He also said that Islam is the biggest victim of the regional turmoil as criminal actions were being perpetrated in the name of the faith. At a meeting with Swedish Foreign Minister Margot Wallström, Nsur said the Syrian conflict has placed immense pressure on Jordan as the influx of refugees strained the education, health, water and labor sector. He also said Jordan backed effort to resume peace talks between the Palestinians and Israelis to attain a comprehensive solution to the conflict. At a meeting with Sweden's Development Minister Isabella Löfven, Nsur said Jordan is interested in expanded cooperation and thanked Stockholm for its support to projects that serve Syrian refugees in the kingdom. Yemeni army units allied to the Houthi militia fired a ballistic missile towards southern Saudi Arabia. The Saudi military said it intercepted the rocket and retaliated with airstrikes on Yemeni territories. Residents in Yemen's capital Sana'a reported hearing a big roar as the Scud was launched from near the city, followed by Saudi-led airstrikes on a presidential palace and a military depot for rockets. A spokesman for the Yemeni forces fighting alongside the Houthi said the missile was aimed at an electricity station in Saudi Arabia's Jizan province. He said the strike was a response to the Saudi attack on Yemen. Earlier, residents said Saudi-led coalition airstrikes hit a home in the Yemeni capital Sana'a, killing 3 people, including a woman and a child. They said the home is believed to have been used by local Houthi leaders. A commander from the rebel Free Syrian Army died in a bomb attack on his car in the southern Turkish province of Hatay. The rebel leader was named by all sources as Jamil Radoun, the commander of Suqur al-Ghab, one of several groups fighting under the Free Syrian Army banner. Radun had survived a similar attack in Turkey in April. The privately run Dogan news agency said he died after explosives were detonated on his vehicle. Kurdish forces backed by US-led coalition airstrikes drove Daesh militants out of 10 villages in Iraq's Kirkuk province in an offensive to secure their territory to the north. Kurdish military sources said the assault began at dawn south of Daquq, a town about 175 kilometers north of the Iraqi capital Baghdad. An aide to a top Kurdish commander taking part in the offensive said 5 Peshmerga had been killed, most of them by improvised explosive devices. The front line between the regional Kurdish Peshmerga forces and Daesh in northern Iraq has hardly budged for months. A source within the Peshmerga forces said Daesh militant had been routed for the village of Abul Jaim by mid-morning. He added fighting continued in another village nearby. The Peshmerga have emerged as an important partner for the United States in its aerial campaign against Daesh. Record numbers of migrants, many of them Syrian refugees, passed through coils of razor wire in their rush to cross into Europe. Hungary made plans to reinforce its southern border with helicopters, mounted police and dogs, and was also considering using the army to stem the flow of migrants. A record 2,533, mainly Syrians, Afghans and Pakistanis, crossed from Serbia into EU members Hungary today. They climbed over or creeped under a razor wire barrier into the hands of an overstretched police force that struggled to fingerprint and process them. Germany expects to receive 800,000 migrants this year. Chancellor Angela Merkel was heckled by dozens of protesters as she visited an eastern town where violent anti-refugee protests erupted at the weekend. The surge in migrants seeking refuge from conflict or poverty in the Middle East, Africa and Asia has confronted Europe with its worst refugee crisis since World War II. Wall Street advanced while European shares and commodities fell as investors balanced strong U.S. economic data with fears about China's slowing economy. Europe's FTSE Euro First 300 index of major companies closed down 1.6% after a choppy trading day. China's key share indexes ended down after attempts to move higher were slapped back by waves of selling several times, reflecting hopes of more government and central bank support. We get more in this report.
It was a move that the Chinese central bank had hoped would restore calm, but even after a rate cut, investors weren't convinced. Europe's main stock markets, which had risen on Tuesday after China's moves, reopened 2% down before making a comeback. And commodities continued to hover near multi-year lows. But that's not nearly as bad as China, where share prices have lost a quarter of their value in little more than a week.
I feel both angry and heartbroken. After all, it's my hard-earned money.
Concerns about China's economy intensified after factory activity shrank and the government devalued the yuan. IG's Chris Beecham says the jitters are justified.
China's growth is a lot lower than we thought, much more down towards the sort of 4% end, which essentially is a recession for China, and that means that major consequences for commodity markets, for mining stocks, for other major global economies, especially in the US.
Some say they are partly to blame too. Jeremy Batstone-Carr from Charles Stanley says that central banks in developed countries have helped create the conditions for volatility.
Ever since 2009, we haven't really had true price discovery across equity markets. And therefore, investors are very hardwired into the factors that have enabled financial assets, both bonds and equities and credit, to perform as well as they have over the course of the past 6 years.
The focus may now turn to the Fed and whether it will raise rates in the autumn. But most economists don't think we have a global financial crisis, predicting further deceleration, but no crash.
Two television journalists were shot and killed in Virginia while conducting a live interview. Authorities said police were pursuing a suspect who appeared to be a disgruntled current or former employee of the TV station. The shooting occurred this morning during an interview being broadcast live from Bridgewater Plaza, a Smith Mountain Lake recreation site. The area is in south-central part of the state, about 190 kilometers from the capital of Richmond. The journalists were filming an interview for the morning news show. In the broadcast, shots were heard and the reporter and the person being interviewed screamed and ducked for cover. The reporter Alison Parker, 24, and the cameraman Adam Ward, 27, died in the incident. The woman being interviewed was wounded. Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe said the suspected shooter has been identified as a disgruntled current or former station employee. Adrenaline junkies have gathered on the Greek island of Kaitos of the Go Fast Games. Set in the Loyan Sea, surrounded by emerald waters, dozens of base jumpers gathered to parachute off the steep cliffs. Base jumping requires the participant to parachute from a fixed structure or a cliff. The beach can only be approached by boat as it is an isolated cove and is surrounded by a huge vertical limestone cliff. On top of the high cliffs, the jump-off point is at a height of 200 meters above sea level. The jumpers perform more than 300 jumps in 4 days, providing visitors with a spectacular yet high adrenaline show.
Hey guys!
Australian youngster Caleb Ewan surprised some of the more seasoned sprinters when he surged to victory in the 5th stage of the Tour of Spain as his Orica teammate Esteban Chaves lost the overall lead to Tom Dumoulin. Ewan beat German John Degenkolb to the line in the 167.3 kilometer stretch to Alcalá de Guadira, with Peter Sagan of Slovakia third and Luxembourg's Jean-Pierre Drucker fourth. Sky leader Chris Froome, who won a second Tour of France crown in July and is bidding for a rare Tour Vuelta double, finished 12th and moved up to the 7th overall. And now a look at the weather forecast. Pleasant tonight in most regions of the kingdom and also mild in the Jordan Valley with northwesterly moderate winds. Tomorrow, relatively hot conditions will prevail in Badia and eastern plains and moderate in hilly areas with moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect mild conditions tonight and a hot day tomorrow with northwesterly light winds. The lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to end the news, here's a recap of our top stories. His Majesty the King holds a series of meetings on Syria and other Middle East conflicts during a trip to Russia. Jordan condemns the closure of entrances to occupied Jerusalem's holy sites to Muslim worshippers and warned Israel against attempts to change the status quo in the holy city. And the Saudi military says it intercepts a ballistic missile fired by Yemen's Houthi militia and retaliates with airstrikes against the rebel group. And with this we come to an end. I'm Farah Ajlouni. Thank you for watching and have a good night.